everyone, so I will be doing my July wrap-up. For the month of July, I read 8 books, and 7 were for the reading rush, so let's get started. The first book I read was Voices from Chernobyl, The Oral History of a Nuclear Disaster by Svetlana Alexievich, and I apologize because there are a few Russian names that I will be trying to pronounce, and I know I will probably be butchering them. This book is a non-fiction history book about the disaster that occurred in Chernobyl in 1986. For a period of 10 years, Alexievich interviewed more than 500 eyewitnesses, including firefighters, the liquidators, who are the ones who cleaned up, and those who lived in the surrounding areas. This book isn't about the technical details that occurred at Chernobyl. It is about the personal tragedies that Chernobyl caused. This was such a powerful read. You read stories from the wives of the firefighters, like Lyudmila Ignatenko, who had to fight and lie to see her husband that was in the hospital. Her husband was in the hospital for serious radiation poisoning. The nurses would warn her that she is in danger just by being near him, but she stayed by his side, and as a result, when her baby was born, it unfortunately died. It absorbed all the radiation and basically saved her life. You read about the liquidators who basically sacrificed their lives so others could live. They basically knew that they were going to die from radiation, but they knew they had to clean it up so the damage wouldn't increase and more people would die. And you read stories about people who were forced to leave their homes with none of their belongings and never were able to return. Nikolai Kalugin was a resident near the disaster, and he said this, which I thought was just so sad. He said, "We didn't just lose a town, we lost our whole lives. I want to bear witness. My daughter died from Chernobyl, and they want us to forget about it." And that is just so horrible because they kept the severity of this situation quiet. They didn't evacuate some towns for like 3 days and just let those people keep slowly dying from radiation. And when that happened, they just wanted to keep quiet. They didn't want to say, oh yeah, Chernobyl caused all these deaths. The stories that you read are so heartbreaking. They kept on suffering for years and years. From cancer they got from the radiation to poverty because they didn't get any compensation from leaving their homes, so they left with nothing. And so most weren't able to survive because they got nothing for their homes, they got nothing for their belongings. I watched the show Chernobyl on HBO, and I just wanted to know more. I really wanted to know more about like the technical details, but I am so glad I picked up this book. I think this book is so much more important than knowing the details that happened at Chernobyl. They do cover it in this book because some people actually worked there and understood it, but I think knowing the heartbreaking details from the people who lived it is so much more important. The second book I read was Girl Interrupted by Suzanne Kaysen. This is a nonfiction memoir about the author's journey with mental health. In 1967, when Suzanne was 18, she tried to commit suicide. And after a visit with a psychiatrist that she's never seen before, she was sent to McLean Hospital and spent 2 years there. So this was a reread for me. I read this back in high school, which sadly was a very long time ago. I remember really liking this book, and I still do like this book. I just have different views on it now. I am not sure she deserved to be there. I think she definitely needed help, but I don't think locking her up was the solution. Especially since some of the things she was diagnosed doesn't exist anymore. They called her promiscuous, which isn't anything to do with mental health. I am more passionate about mental illness than I was back then, so this book caused more emotions for me. I was angry and sad most of the time. I think it's sad that since 1967, things haven't really changed on how people treat you and view mental illness. There is a movie, Girl Interrupted, which I still love. It is a little different, but I feel like it still has the same impact. I suggest checking out both, or either one is fine. The third book I read is If You Ever Tell by Carleen Thompson. This is a mystery thriller novel about Teresa Farr. And when she was 17, she woke up in the middle of the night and found her dad and stepmother murdered. The killer was still in the house, and before leaving, the killer scratched her and took off. And she found her 8-year-old stepsister hiding and stabbed. The whole town thought Teresa did it, despite a killer admitting that he did it. And now 8 years later, the killer has recanted, and Teresa is receiving threatening notes. I enjoyed this book very much. I found it very entertaining, and I am a huge fan of this author. She writes a very standard mystery thriller novels, and so there's nothing really unique or shocking with her books, but I love them. I am so entertained throughout it. This author always has a romance between the character, and it's fine. If you read Carleen Thompson's books before, you will know who the love interest will be each time, and it doesn't take away from the story. And so that's why the romance doesn't bother me, because it's still mainly about the mystery. The next book I read was Final Girls by Riley Sager. This is a mystery thriller novel about Quincy, who about 10 years ago went on vacation with 5 of her friends, and she is the only one that came back alive. However, she really doesn't remember the events that took place that resulted in all her friends dying. And since she was the only survivor, the media deemed her as a final girl, and a final girl consists of 2 other people who went through similar events. Lisa, who survived when all her sorority sisters were killed, and Sam, who survived a massacre at an inn she was working at. And now Quincy is living in New York City in a nice apartment, and she is a baking blogger. She is still traumatized by the events that took place in her past, and the way she copes is through Xanax. And when Lisa, one of the final girls, is found dead from her parents' suicide, Sam, the other final girl, shows up at Quincy's doorstep. I really enjoyed this book. I think it was a really good mystery thriller novel. Towards the end, it had me really hooked. So I do have a love-hate relationship with this book, because it jumps through 10 years ago from her on vacation and to present time. And the thing that I hate is because it opens up with you learning a little bit about the vacation, them arriving, and then towards the middle you learn a little bit more, and then towards the end it starts to reveal how they all died. And so from the beginning, I'm reading it and I'm just like, God dang it, I just want to know what happens, because you know that they die, and you just have to read through it, and you're just left there in suspense, waiting for it to be revealed. And so I do like that, because I'm hooked, and it makes me really want to read it more and more, but the part of me hates it because I just want to know right there and then. And so by the end, everything was being revealed, and so I just couldn't put it down. The next book I read was The Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams. This is the second book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And in the first book, Arthur Dent is saved from Earth minutes before it was destroyed by his best friend. And so together they journey throughout space, and they meet Zaphod Beetlebrock, who is the 2-headed president of the galaxy, and Trillian, his girlfriend, who he met on Earth. And Marvin, the depressed robot, which is my favorite character. And so this is a continuation of that. I just love the humor of this book. This humor is not for everyone. If you don't like British humor, then you probably won't like this book. But I love it, and I suggest listening to the audiobook because it is amazing. The next book I read was Mortal Engines by Philip Reeves. This is a young adult science fiction fantasy novel. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic future London. London is a traction city that rolls around the wasteland on wheels, trying to find smaller traction cities to devour. In London, Tom is this apprentice at the museum, and when he meets his hero, Thaddeus Valentine, who is the head historian, a teenage girl named Hester Shaw attempts to kill him, and Tom saves his life, and when she runs off, he runs after her. And Hester Shaw tries to convince Tom that Valentine is not the man he thinks he is, that he's actually the bad guy. And then she escapes. And when Valentine learns that Tom has spoken to the girl, he pushes him out of the moving city. And so now Tom has to team up with Hester Shaw to get back to his home. I really liked the world. It is very steampunk. I think the author did an amazing job describing everything that was involved in this world. You could really picture this post-apocalyptic steampunk universe. There were airship chases and reanimated corpses and pirates and other smaller traction cities trying to capture people to sell them as slaves just to survive. I think the world building is the best part of this book. I just wish that it wasn't young adult. There was so much more that this author could have done. If it wasn't young adult, I think more things would have been added. And the characters are teenagers and they act like teenagers. Especially Tom, he was so immature in the beginning, and that kind of took me out of the story at first. So it was good, and I will continue with this series. I just wish things were fleshed out more. The 7th book I read was The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan. This is the 5th and final book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series. And this book is about the battle against the Titans that this whole series was leading up to. And I think this was a good ending to the series. The ending is a little anticlimactic and a little corny, but what can you expect from a middle grade series? It was still very good. You just have to understand that it is a middle series, so it won't be this amazing drawn out battle. And I really enjoyed this series overall. And I will say that I am glad the love triangle that was being built throughout this whole series was resolved in a very mature way. There was no drama, and so it didn't make me hate the series. Most of the time, love triangles are so dramatic and just so annoying, and I hate them. And this love triangle, I didn't mind at all because it was handled very well. And the last book I read was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. I think everyone by now knows the plot of this, so I won't give you a brief summary of what this is about. I'll just give you my review. So of course, this is a reread for me, and I'm so glad I reread this book. And I can't wait to reread the rest of the series, because there were so many parts that I just didn't really remember. Like in the movie, I remember Hagrid coming in and using his umbrella to turn Dudley into having a pig's tail, but I really didn't remember the backstory of his umbrella. And in the book, it was described that, when Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts, they broke his wand in half, and he's not really supposed to use magic, but he took those pieces and made an umbrella from it, and I had no idea about that, because I was like a child. It's been a very long time since I read this book, and so I just didn't remember that. And there are many things like that I didn't remember, and so I'm so glad I read this again. And I am so glad I still love this book. You know how as a child you have all these things that you used to love, like these movies and books that you used to love, and then when you watch them or read them again as an adult, it's not the same and it's kind of ruined for you. Like, I recently watched Fern Gully and I loved Fern Gully as a child, and then I rewatched it and I was like, oh, this is it, and it made me sad because it wasn't the same. And so I kind of wish that I did not watch Fern Gully and left the memory of it the same. But I am so glad it wasn't the case with Harry Potter. I loved it back then and I love it now. So those are all the books I read in the month of July. So like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!